you mentioned the administration is going to do everything it can to get a ceasefire, both in Gaza and Lebanon before the end of the administration. Particularly on Gaza, I think there had obviously been months of ceasefire talks. Then around Sinwar's death, there was this effort to restart the talks. That hasn't been successful. What is the state at this moment? Are there talks? Is there any prospect for a ceasefire? Are the sides engaging?
We continue to talk to the mediators, to our fellow mediators, and continue to talk about whether there may be appropriate formulations that could advance the ball and get us off the kind of stalemate that we've been in for some time. And it's been publicly reported that one of the proposals that we put forward with the other mediators, Hamas rejected last weekend. So that doesn't mean that we'll stop. We're going to continue to try to push to get a ceasefire and find a way to end the war, but it takes the parties being willing to engage on those efforts. Said.
Thank you, man. On does the letter envision a number of trucks? I mean, I don't recall that should go in on any particular day. Did that include any figure?
It does. I'll have to go back to the letter. I'll refer you back to the letter to look at the details.
Okay, thank you. I want to ask you about reports on Beit Lahia that it is being ethnically cleansed. Are you aware of these reports? And are you in a position, this administration, does it have a plan, or could it have a plan to prevent this from happening?
So I think that you were referring again to the so-called general's plan.
Yes.
And I will just make clear that we have engaged directly with the government of Israel on this question. The secretary raised it directly with the prime minister when we were there 2 weeks ago. The prime minister said, that is not our plan. It's not what we're implementing. They can speak for themselves. I'm just reporting what they said to us. And the secretary made clear, both privately and publicly, that we would firmly reject any such plan. And you have seen us push for expanded humanitarian access into the areas where fighting is going on, including into these restricted areas. And as I just noted a moment ago, today we saw, for the first time in several weeks, a convoy of humanitarian assistance actually go into Beit Hanun. And it's important that that delivery of humanitarian assistance continue to those civilians that are in an area, even in an area where fighting is occurring.
So, but you don't, you don't observe yourself that what is happening is basically, I mean, I don't know if you want to term it that way, but it is like ethnic cleansing. It is like driving people out or trying to drive them out.
So I'm not going to characterize. The government of Israel can speak for itself what it is doing. What we are making clear to the government of Israel is we don't want to see people displaced from their homes. Now, look, if there is fighting in an area, evacuation is an appropriate thing to occur. This has long been the policy of the United States, long been the policy of other governments, that if a government is operating militarily in an area where civilians are sheltering, that you want to see civilians have the ability to evacuate their homes so they can move to safety. At the end of the fighting, however, we want to see them move back to their homes and want to see them move back to their neighborhoods and have the ability to rebuild their homes, knowing that, of course, in many of these areas, their homes have been destroyed, their entire neighborhoods have been destroyed. In the meantime, while people are still in areas where fighting is going on, we want to make sure they get humanitarian access, and that's what we're going to continue to push for.
In this case, they have been moved back and forth many times, and they have been struck. Let me ask you about UNRWA. Now, UNRWA has told the Israelis that, replacing UNRWA relief agency would be your responsibility, whatever that means. Now, we know that the president-elect back in 2018 basically cut off aid to UNRWA, so we know where they stand. I want to ask you, is there anything that could possibly be done over the next few weeks to make sure that UNRWA stays, that, I don't mean to be snarky or flippant, to make it Trump-proof in any way, that the organization would continue to do?
So we will continue to make clear that we support the work that UNRWA does. As you know, we are banned by an act of Congress from funding UNRWA. That law is not going to change before President Biden leaves office, but we support the work that UNRWA does. But as to what decisions will be made by the future president, I obviously can't speak to those. There will be a new president on January 20th. They'll have their own, well, I assume they'll have their own press briefings, and you can show up and ask them the questions about that, Saeed.
Can I ask you a question on the tonnage of bombs dropped on Gaza? You know, it is said that 85,000 tons of bombs in Gaza. Do you have a figure? Can you confirm that or deny it?
I don't have a figure, but I can tell you, obviously, the destruction of Gaza has been widespread, and the civilian harm that has emanated from that destruction has been widespread. We've seen over 40,000 people die, many of them civilians. And Saeed, it just goes to illustrate again why we are trying to reach an end to this conflict, and not just a temporary end to this conflict, which is always important to emphasize, but an end to this conflict that is durable and won't just lead to further conflict between Israel and Hamas, or Israel and other terrorist groups. We want to see Hamas replaced by a different governing authority in Gaza, and that's what we're trying to achieve.